The new HBO film, The Normal Heart, depicts the struggles of those people at the coalface of the emerging AIDS crisis in New York City 3 decades ago. But who were the real-life activists and doctors of that time? We're joined by a few of them for a first-hand glimpse into the reality of AIDS in the early 80s. You obviously treated some of those early cases way back when we didn't know what was going on. What was the atmosphere like in the hospital? What did you think you were dealing with?
Well, I mean, it depends on how far back you go, and I go back to the very beginning, but I would say that at a certain point where treatments began to become available in the late 80s and the early 90s, which was really the height of the epidemic and loss of life in New York, there was really a sense, of course, of the ongoing tragedy and loss, but there was also a feeling that there was a race for survival, that basically that there were tools that could be used to keep people alive longer, healthier, and that perhaps maybe some really major breakthroughs might happen. And I believe that it was directly as a result of activism, and certainly Peter's activism, Larry Kramer's activism, that really helped accelerate progress and woke up sort of a sleeping medical profession and pharmaceutical industry. As a consequence, we got better treatments, I think, sooner than anyone would have anticipated. That really saved many, many people's lives. But certainly, there was a tremendous amount in the very beginning of fear, suffering, and just terrible situations.
Do you remember seeing your first case?
My first case was, I think, a matter of personal fate for me, because my first case was when I was a medical student at NYU Medical School in my third year. In November of 1980, just through fate, I was assigned the very first person who was identified in that hospital, Bellevue, as having this disease right around the time that Michael Gottlieb reported from Los Angeles 6 cases of this new disease in gay men from Los Angeles. So I was there at the very beginning. And I'll tell one anecdotal story. 1 year later, the epidemic had mushroomed, and I was doing my infectious disease my infectious disease rotation, and the head of infectious disease at the time, or one of the heads, someone said, "Well, isn't it terrible what's happening to these young men?" And I hate to say it, but it's true, and it shaped my own consciousness of the situation. He said they deserve it anyway, which was unbelievable, very unfair, and really made it clear that there were a lot of things going on in this epidemic in addition to the medical aspects.
What was that conversation back then, Phill, within the Black and Latino communities when AIDS was perceived, I suppose, within those communities as being something of a white gay guy's disease? Was there a sense of exclusion from the overall activist mission?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in some cases, people were in denial, and the way that HIV was perceived and characterized in the beginning allowed them to be in denial. Now HIV was characterized as a white gay men's disease, but more than that, a white gay men's disease of certain type of white gay men. You had to live in Fire Island, or you had to live in the Village, or if you're in Chicago, you had to live in Newtown. I mean, people were so afraid that they were grasping at ways to say it was not about them. And then that got perpetuated in the way the disease was characterized.
When Paul says that, of course, now it's a treatable disease, back in 1985, it was anything but that. When you received that diagnosis, was it a death sentence?
I thought it was. There were no treatments. It was a very scary time. The Rock Hudson news had just broke in America, and that became the first time the country even considered that it might be a serious epidemic. They had been ignoring it up until that point. But the first thing the country did was go into a panic. It became a major story of stigma and hate. And turning its back. And I did what Paul and Phill have said. We need that anger that Larry Kramer brought forth in the 80s. We need that today because young gay men are becoming infected again, especially young gay men of color.
You know, it's so frustrating when you feel that you are the only right person in a room. I mean, I've never felt that way. I know these two have.